Hey everybody, how's it going? Matthew Kadish here, author of the Earthman Jack Space Saga, available over on Amazon.com. And today we're going to be coming at you with some real talk about real industry news and rumors and stuff that has to do with Star Wars. Now, the Twitterverse has been abuzz in recent days over this rumor that Gary over at Nerdrotic's YouTube channel has basically broken for everyone. And this was a very interesting kind of news drop by Gary. And I want to start off this video by saying, first of all, I love Nerdrotic's channel. I think Gary is very entertaining and he has really good insights into a lot of different TV shows and movies and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of his channel. If you haven't already subscribed to him, I highly recommend that you do. But I have to disagree with his take on this. We were both on a live stream over at Midnight's Edge the other day when he got news of this from his source, and then he went on to do a video, and since then other people have picked up on this, and it has been kind of accepted that there's some validity to this rumor. Even though Gary makes it very clear that he's a commentator, he's not a news source, that this is to be treated as a rumor, that this is unsubstantiated stuff. But the way the internet works, people latch onto something that fits their narrative and they just don't let it go. And being a member of the entertainment industry for over a decade, being someone who has bothered to learn about the industry and familiarize himself with some of the ins and outs of the more legal side of things, I do not buy this rumor, and it has to do with Star Wars and Galaxy's Edge and certain licensing things. So if you're not really into the inside baseball stuff of the entertainment industry, then this video is probably going to be kind of boring for you, because we're going to be talking about the rumor, which is, of course, that George Lucas still retains some type of ownership of the Star Wars intellectual property, aka IP, and that Disney is basically licensing original trilogy characters and things from Lucas, and that is the reason why they haven't been included in like Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, and why they've been killing them off in the movies, etc., etc., etc. So rather than explain this, out in excruciating detail, I'm going to hop on over to Gary's video, and I'm going to let him lay it out for you instead. So I've already got it queued up here, so let's hear what Gary has to say.
Again, this is a rumor that nobody can ever prove unless there's some sort of Sony hack at Disney. Oh, that would just be terrible if that would happen. But this is also something that really they'll have a hard time denying, because people just won't believe them. We can't really take what these companies say at face value, and unless they provide actual documented evidence, this is something that will be speculated on a lot, because it's very similar to what's going on with Star Trek and Star Trek Discovery and Secret Hideout and the possible connections to Bad Robot, and that 25% difference due to licensing. If you're a Star Wars fan, you're not going to know what I'm talking about, so I'll link the Midnight's Edge video in the description. But let's just say there's a reason Star Trek doesn't look or feel like Star Trek over there at CBS. And that's because of intellectual property law and the murkiness of merchandising, especially when you associate yourself with J.J. Abrams and Bad Robot and Alex Kurtzman. And there's still a connection to that in Star Wars. And it looks like something very similar has happened here. Now, I got this sent to me while I was on a live stream with Midnight's Edge, and I hinted to it a little bit. Well, Gary, I have Star Wars news. I know why they could not use the originals as its base for the sequel trilogy at Galaxy's Edge. They didn't buy them. Lucas still owns the originals, and they license from him. Now, I'm going to repeat that. They didn't buy them. Lucas still owns the originals, and they license from him. Now, I've asked for a little bit of elaboration. I haven't gotten it yet, but when I hear the originals, I'm thinking the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy. So I don't think it's saying here that George Lucas still owns old Star Wars, original Star Wars. I think that he owns a piece, or has the right to a percentage of any profits from older stuff, even though he has sold everything outright to Disney, but it turns out it's not that outright. Maybe. The implications of this is huge, and that is because this is why Disney has not put out a despecialized edition and has been trying to kill off original characters. Now,
all right, so I'm not going to go through the whole video here, but you guys get the gist. This source that Gary has is basically saying that Star Wars is partially owned by Lucas still, and that Disney is licensing the rights to these Star Wars characters from him. And, you know, I don't know who Gary's source is. I don't know who's feeding him this. He says that he's gotten this from multiple sources, but that doesn't mean anything to me because, you know, multiple sources saying one thing just means that lots of people are wrong. Back when there was this big rumor that Kathleen Kennedy was going to be fired, and I was one of the few or only voices out there screaming at the top of their lungs, Kathleen Kennedy's not going to be fired. Nobody believed me. There were multiple sources feeding people information that said that Kathleen Kennedy was going to be fired from from running Lucasfilm, and it just didn't add up to me. And so just because multiple people are saying this is true doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually true. And Gary made that very clear in his run-up to revealing this. But I want to talk a little bit about licensing and why this doesn't make any sense at all, and why I think this rumor is complete bupkis and why this source is not to be trusted. So I know that a lot of people, especially those who are unhappy with how Disney has been handling the Star Wars IP, look for pretty much anything that they can latch onto in order to justify, them criticizing Disney because they feel betrayed, they feel angry. I know what that feels like because I too don't like how Disney has been treating the intellectual property, the franchise, but most of all the fans. So if you ever dare to criticize The Last Jedi, people call you all types of names, and they say that this isn't for you, and they try to denigrate your opinion and your love of the franchise and all this stuff. And it gets very nasty. And so when it gets personal like that, people want to lash out and they want to strike back and they want the worst possible thing to be true so they can justify their hatred. And that's fine. I get it. But if you're going to actually want to invoke real change, like if you want Lucasfilm to actually listen to your concerns and course correct and have Disney realize that there's an actual problem here, that they need to listen to the fans and change things up, you can't do it if you're constantly just flying it off the handle, being outraged by ridiculous rumors, which I believe this is. So we don't know the specifics of the deal that George Lucas made with Disney when they bought the rights to Star Wars. But we do know some things. First of all, there is no way in heck that Disney's lawyers would ever hand over $4 billion to George Lucas and not have 100% ownership of everything. Like, if that was the case, if Lucas did indeed retain some form of ownership to this stuff and Disney paid him $4 billion, the lawyers who brokered that deal should be fired, and the board of directors should be demanding Bob Iger's resignation immediately, and it would be the stupidest, most idiotic deal ever made in Hollywood. Now, Disney didn't need Star Wars, okay? Disney was very profitable before Star Wars came along. They had Marvel, which is, the biggest franchise on the planet right now. They had Pixar. They had Disney classic movies. Like Disney's empire was vast before Star Wars got incorporated into it. So the idea that they were so desperate for the Star Wars IP that they were willing to kind of take a substandard deal and allow Lucas to hold on to the rights for that is moronic. It just doesn't make sense. If they're paying out, $4 billion, over $4 billion to purchase something, they're going to want to own it lock, stock, and barrel. Now, here's what we know. At the time that the Disney deal was going through with Lucas, there were two issues that kind of muddied the waters of the purchase. And that is that 20th Century Fox had retained some measure of rights to episode 4, A New Hope. And that gave them certain, control over legacy characters from that movie. And I believe that their rights were for the theatrical distribution rights to that film. Now, in addition to that, over at Turner Broadcasting Networks, which is a part of the Warner Brothers media empire, they had a license to the original trilogy's TV broadcast rights. Now, that meant that they had exclusivity to show Star Wars episodes 4, 5, and 6 on broadcast television or cable television, something like that. But that didn't extend to streaming. So Disney still had the streaming rights, but they can't, broadcast it on ABC or any of the other networks that they own because Time Warner has those rights. So those were kind of two things that obviously were kind of hiccups in this deal where, these two other competing competitors had these rights to Star Wars. So Disney didn't own all the rights outright because, of various legal issues, but they own the general IP, they own the company, they own everything. So I don't believe this, that Lucas retains some type of ownership of the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy or anything like that. I believe that, he sold that stuff outright to Disney. And one of the reasons why we've seen Disney kind of pull back from the original trilogy characters with, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge at Disneyland being, a prequel trilogy thing as opposed to an original trilogy thing and so on and so forth, is because at the time that Galaxy's Edge was being planned, they did not have all these rights shorn up. And so they chose to go with a version of Star Wars that they owned outright just for legal purposes, because they didn't want to muddy the waters or enhance the value of the Star Wars IP that 20th Century Fox and Turner Broadcasting had. So rather than incorporate the original trilogy characters, they chose to focus on characters that they owned because it was created under their stewardship. So in my opinion, that's the reason why Galaxy's Edge basically, instead of Mos Eisley, it's Batuu, Smuggler's Run. There's a reason why the Millennium Falcon looks different, all this stuff. And it's because they needed to change it to make it different enough from the original trilogy to avoid any legal hiccups with these rights issues. Now, eventually, Disney was able to buy out 20th Century Fox and bring in the rights to Episode 4 fully under their control. They still have that license contract with Warner Broadcasting, which is not set to expire until, I believe, 2024. So that's still outstanding. But in terms of ownership, because Disney acquired Fox, they now own the Star Wars IPs outright. But at the time that they were planning Galaxy's Edge, that was not the case. So they had to kind of go forward with their plan and build out Galaxy's Edge and release it, knowing that they didn't have all the rights to the original trilogy. And so I believe that was the motivation as to why they basically decided to, focus it on the sequel trilogy. And this idea that Lucas owns the originals and Disney licensed from them is completely bogus, and it's very easy to disprove this. And the reason that you can disprove this is just from the licensing structure. So basically, if Disney owns the Star Wars license, they're allowed to legally license it out to licensees, people who want the Star Wars license to use in other industries. So for instance, if you're a t-shirt maker and you want to put Star Wars material on your t-shirts because people are going to buy those t-shirts because they're fans of Star Wars, you license the IP from Disney Consumer Products, so that you can legally put that on your t-shirts and you can sell that and you can make a profit. Now, If Disney does not own the Star Wars IP outright, that means that all their licensing deals are actually sub-licensing deals where they're licensing from a licensor and then relicensing that license to other licensees. And the reason this is not done is because should Disney have a falling out or some type of complication with the original licensor, then all the things that they license out to their licensees become illegal, essentially. And the original licensor, George Lucas, in this example, could potentially revoke those licenses or sue the people for, copyright infringement or what have you. And it just opens up a whole mess of legal headaches that are easily avoided when it's just a single licensor who owns the material licensing out that stuff. So this concept that Disney is sub-licensing to huge companies like EA and Hasbro and stuff like that just does not fly, because I don't think that they would ever do that. Now, what I do believe is that I'm sure that George Lucas has some type of royalty structure in the sale contract where he gets a percentage, like a small royalty, every time these characters are used in movies or TV shows or what have you. That's just basic Hollywood, like actors get a royalty every time, a movie there and gets played somewhere. And so this idea of royalties being paid out to creatives and creators in Hollywood is not something that's so far-fetched. Now, in terms of Lucas's deal, he got $4 billion in both cash and stock. So $2 billion in cash, $2 billion in Disney stock, making him the second biggest shareholder in Disney. But in addition to that, if he somehow finagled a royalty fee for this stuff, that would explain why Disney's like changing stuff up or, trying to minimize the use of legacy characters from the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, simply because they're trying to save some money and avoid having to pay out George Lucas. Now, royalties are so common in Hollywood that I don't see why they would choose to do this as a financial decision, simply because, they do that all the time. It's not like it's going to eat into their profit. Disney's plan was basically to, make back that $4 billion purchase price as quickly as possible, which they did by releasing, these 4 Star Wars movies that we have, The Force Awakens, Rogue One, The Last Jedi, and Solo. They've made back their $4 billion, not just off those movies, but also off of the licensing that they got from the IP. So they're already in the black in terms of Star Wars. So it's not a big deal for them to pay out like an extra royalty fee to George Lucas if they know that, the original trilogy characters and the prequel characters are going to make them lots of money. It's just a small piece of the pie that they'd probably shave off as a royalty, not just for him, but for, the actors and other people who are involved in this stuff. That's typical Hollywood business. So this idea that Disney does not own the license to Star Wars wholesale just doesn't fly with me for various reasons. And I think that the reason that we've seen a lack of respect and use of the original trilogy characters had to do mostly with the rights to the original trilogy not being fully sorted out by the time all this stuff was set into motion, like the making of The Force Awakens and the planning of Galaxy's Edge. But beyond that, you also have people at the helm of Lucasfilm and making these movies who don't actually really respect Star Wars, like Rian Johnson. I feel like a lot of the choices that were made with The Last Jedi were done not so much because they couldn't do them, but because it was a choice that the filmmaker made, and it was something that, just didn't appeal to fans. And the killing off of the original trilogy characters in the sequel trilogy, I think that just has to do with them not wanting to have to deal with these actors anymore. I know Harrison Ford had been wanting to kill off Han Solo for a long time, and Harrison Ford has a long relationship with J.J. Abrams. So, I think that was just kind of reached because Harrison Ford didn't want to play the character anymore. In terms of Mark Hamill probably would have been happy to play the character, but Rian Johnson, for whatever reason, wanted to kill him off. So, there's a lot of jumbling of motivations here, not just the legal business side, but also the creative side as well. So you can't place this all on Disney's head. This is, just kind of like Hollywood creative decisions as well as, murky legal issues. Because as Gary said, intellectual property law in Hollywood is probably one of the most confusing things known to man. And it's very hard to kind of navigate those waters. I mean, if you guys are interested, you can check out my expose over on medium.com about the Star Trek licenses and how that mess has screwed up that franchise from top to bottom. But it's much simpler for Star Wars because I don't believe for a second that Disney did not buy out ownership rights from George Lucas. It just doesn't make any sense. I've never heard of a business deal like that going through. I mean, $4 billion to license out something that you don't own is just ridiculous. You don't pay billions of dollars for licenses. You pay billions of dollars to own something that you can then license out. And so I don't know who Gary's source is, but I definitely think that they are mistaken here, and I would like to see some proof that their claim is actually legitimate. Until then, we need to treat this just like any other rumor, which is basically it's false until proven otherwise. And if you guys want to go out there on Twitter and link to this video to debunk this rumor or what have you, please feel free to do so. I'm more than happy to get into more details on this if there's interest in it. But for the most part, my stance is no way in heck is this true. There is no reality where this is even remotely possible. And the more people who believe this type of thing, the harder it is to get Disney and Lucasfilm to pay attention to our legitimate criticisms, because they can just point to us as being people who don't know what's actually going on, and we're spreading rumors, and we are the bad guys and we're not to be listened to. So keep that in mind, but let me know, what do you guys think? Do you believe this rumor? Do you agree with me and think that it's complete butkus? Do you know anything about Hollywood licensing? If so, please let me know your thoughts in the comments section. And as always, for all your movie, TV, and entertainment news and analysis, please subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate it. Until next time, this is Matthew Kadish, and I'll see you in the next video.